the fact the European Union launched its own Indo-Pacific strategy back in September, following several European countries launching their own national strategies, particularly Germany, the Netherlands, and France, which themselves followed strategies being launched by the United States and Japan, which were first sort of an initiator, perhaps, of this recent concept. It has indeed become a fashionable concept or topic, with no less than 8 or 10 strategies, depending how you count. But of course, the reactions by certain countries like China or Russia have been fairly negative to these concepts, and there have been also side effects, such as the launch of the Australia, United Kingdom, United States group, also in September of last year, which is also related to this region. I would like, can I ask everybody please to shut down your microphones, except for the speakers, and to discuss this issue today for the next hour or so. I'm very happy to welcome 3 very distinguished speakers. First, Christophe PENOT, who is France's ambassador for the Indo-Pacific since November 2020. I believe it's a newly created position, is the inaugural holder of that post, but he also has strong credentials as a former French ambassador to Australia and to Malaysia, and has also spent time in Japan, in Canada, in the UK, and in various Asia-Pacific countries, such as Vietnam, where I believe I first met him. And he has, for the past 2 years, traveled around the region. And he also hosted and coordinated the Indo-Pacific ministerial meeting that took place in February of this year in Paris during the French presidency of the European Union, which is ending in about 10 days after 6 months of turmoil, I would say, mainly due to the war in Ukraine. And I'd be really interested to know from his point of view, and especially since we are here at ESSEC and especially at IRENE, how easy or how difficult it was to organize such a meeting in such a complicated time. Secondly, I will turn to Dr. Michito TSURUOKA, who is an associate professor at Keio University and who is kind enough to join us from Japan at a very late time for him. And Dr. TSURUOKA is an expert on foreign affairs and security issues, and he's also a practitioner, having spent time at the Ministry of Defense, and he was seconded to the Japanese Ministry of Defense as the Deputy Director of International Policy, and he was in charge of multilateral security and defense cooperation in Asia. He has written extensively on the region and also on EU-Japan relations, which obviously will be of high interest to us because he'll be able to give us a perception of the European Union Indo-Pacific strategy from a Japanese and Asian point of view. He has also written about non-proliferation and Japan-Russia relations, which is also very relevant. And last but not least, we will have my colleague, Professor Frédéric CHARILLON, who is a professor of political science at ESSEC, also an expert on security issues, who has just published a book in French called Guerre d'influence, and who will make some comments on the global picture, and he will follow presentations by both speakers. So without further ado, I will invite Ambassador PENOT to give us his views on this fascinating topic. And please, the floor is yours, Ambassador. And thank you very much for being with us.
No, thank you for inviting me, Philippe. And I'm also very happy to share this event with Professor TSURUOKA, for whom it is very late in Tokyo, and also with the Professor CHARILLON. Thank you so much. Let me cover, because allotted time is limited. Let me cover two issues. One is the Ukraine, and the other one is where we stand as regards the EU strategy. I shall leave aside for the time being the French national strategy, but we'll be happy to go back to this later when during the Q&A. Ukraine first, because obviously this new international context created by the war of aggression against Ukraine has had obvious repercussions in the Indo-Pacific. And I will give you 3 examples which, in my view, are extremely significant. Well, first of all, the question is whether the Ukraine crisis will distract the European Union and France and other EU countries and reduce their long-term engagement in the region. I think the answer is no. And I will try to come back to this later, but the first reason I would give now is that what happens in Ukraine precisely shows the importance of the principles that we promote in the Indo-Pacific and which are at the core of our engagement. These principles, of course, are sovereignty, territorial integrity, the rule of law, peaceful settlement of disputes by negotiation, and so on. So I think Ukraine, the crisis in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine makes them even more relevant, and therefore a good reason for us to increase rather than reduce our engagement. I think the second thing I would like to stress is that the war has reinforced polarization. And it has increased also, indeed, confrontation in the Indo-Pacific. I was at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and when I listened to the American Secretary of State of Defense, and the Chinese Minister of Defense, it is obvious that we are in a time of confrontation. The French and European approach is multipolar. We don't support polarization. We don't support confrontation. And we do not follow the logic of antagonistic blocs, which is at work at the moment in the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere. So this is the European strategy. This is the French strategy. We want to promote and propose an alternative to this polarization. It is not easy, but this is our way, and this is our values as well, and our DNA, I would say, in international policy. And the third aspect I would like to cover regarding Ukraine is, of course, the economic dimension, because the new strategic context created by the war in Ukraine has intensified the debate on economic security, about resilience of value chains, about the future of the global economy, which is so crucial for the region, about dependencies as well, economic dependencies. And I believe that these issues, because of Ukraine, will be even more important in the Indo-Pacific context. So let me cover now the EU strategy and recent developments. First of all, the EU dimension is extremely important for France, and the publication last September of the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific was for us a major milestone. We have worked very hard to deliver this outcome, and it shows also, very importantly, that there is now a collective recognition by the EU, its member states and the EU institutions as well, that we have strong interests in the region and that the Indo-Pacific is strategically significant. As I said, I do not believe that the war in Ukraine will change that. We're going to keep the course and increase our engagement in the Indo-Pacific. And I also have very good hope, based on my close contacts with them, that the next presidencies who come after France, the Czech Republic, and next year Sweden and Spain, will keep the momentum going. The momentum that was created by the forum that we hold in Paris on the 22nd of February. It brought together 52 ministers or representatives from both the EU and the Indo-Pacific, including also, importantly, regional organizations from the Indo-Pacific. It was the first meeting of its kind between EU representatives and Indo-Pacific countries at ministerial level, and it came only 6 months after the launch of the strategy. And I think we managed to fulfill our objectives, which were, number one, to reaffirm the EU's long-term commitment to this region of strategic interest, and number two, to discuss and identify together concrete actions which will give more flesh to the EU strategy. And this we did during the 3 roundtables that were organized on the morning of the 22nd of February on security and defense, on connectivity and digital issues, and on global issues, in particular climate change, biodiversity, and health issues. We started things in Paris, or things started before that were confirmed in Paris. There is, of course, the Global Gateway Initiative, which is much talked about, adopted by the EU last December, and it offers a new framework to help reduce strategic dependencies and promote sustainable connectivity. We'll come back during the discussion to the Global Gateway. It is being launched. It is very ambitious. It does not cover, it is important to remind you that it does not cover the Indo-Pacific only, it covers the whole world. And there is a good reasons to believe that Africa and Ukraine and the neighborhood of the EU will receive a lot of resources from this initiative. But there are more than 2 billion euros committed for the next 3 years under this initiative for the Indo-Pacific. And we are launching now between the EU and ASEAN Team Europe initiatives that will be funded by Global Gateway, as well as member states' money on the Green Partnership, another Team Europe initiative on sustainable connectivity. With the Pacific, we have the Green-Blue Alliance with the Pacific and Timor-Leste. We have the Kiwa initiative on biodiversity. And more generally, we have a lot of initiatives regarding connectivity and digital issues, including network security, data protection, the problem of supply chains, semiconductors, responsible artificial intelligence, cyber threats, etc. And last, on defense and security, the EU will act as a security provider in cyber, in counterterrorism, in space, also in maritime security, and we are continuing two important initiatives in capacity building, which are ESSEC and Primario. I think I've spoken for almost 9 minutes, so I should stop there, but we'll go back to these issues later in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was extremely useful and wide-ranging as an introduction. I suggest we move on to Professor Michito TSURUOKA and from Keio University, and please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and kind introduction. Yes, let me also start by saying a few words on Ukraine first, and then Japan's views on France and Europe's Indo-Pacific engagement, and also a little bit about geopolitical impact of the war in Ukraine on Asia. And first on Japan's response to the war in Ukraine, and so Kishida government and government led by Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, the response has been quite tough on Russia. So in terms of imposing sanctions, and compared to what Japan did in the wake of the annexation of Crimea back in 2014, so this time the Japan's action is very much fully in line with other G7 partners, including the European Union. So and what we have seen so far is an unprecedented level of coordination and contact between Japanese officials and the European officials, including, of course, the European Union, Brussels people. So and also the G7 process has been quite active. So the G7, I think the role of G7 has been very much reinvigorated. And first, under the UK presidency last year, so the UK had a lot of good reasons to revitalize the G7 process, because the UK was about to leave the European Union last year, just after the leaving the European Union. It was really important for the British government to reinvigorate the G7 process. But this year as well, the German presidency of the G7, I think, is quite active. So we have produced a lot of documents on Ukraine, and also we have imposed sanctions on Russia, and the coordination between and among G7 partners has been quite extraordinary. So and actually Japan is going to chair the G7 next year. So I believe that there will be a smooth transition from German presidency to the Japanese presidency of the G7. So this is the role of G7, I think, is really important in this regard. And one of the biggest reasons why the Tokyo this time, the position is quite tough on Russia, is that the Prime Minister Kishida said in his speech at Shangri-La Dialogue just last weekend, 2 weeks ago, actually. So he said that the Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. So and Kishida has been emphasizing that the change of status quo by force should never be repeated in anywhere in the world, of course, including East Asia. So and the hidden message actually behind that is that given the fact that Japan is fully aligned with European powers on this crisis, on this war in Ukraine. So our expectation is that we expect Europeans to be fully aligned with Japan and US or other partners and allies in Asia if something really serious happens in Asia involving China perhaps the crisis in the Taiwan Strait, or a crisis in the South China Sea or East China Sea. So that sort of expectations are there. And in that context, the level of interest in Japan, in Europe's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region is really high. So that was very much stimulated by the series of European naval deployments to the region last year. So that was they very much started by France, by the Jeanne d'Arc mission, the amphibious assault ship, and came to Japan, and we did for the first time the ground exercise not only between the French and Japanese forces, but also together with Americans as well. So that actually paved a sort of way for a more practical cooperation, including the more serious joint exercises, joint training and exercises between Japanese forces and various European powers. And also the last year saw a deployment of a British carrier strike group, and that attracted a lot of attention in Japan as well. And also the Tokyo very much welcomed the release of various Indo-Pacific strategies by individual European powers and also by the European Union. So of course the different strategies have different characters and a different focus, but I think the one thing those strategies have in common is the fact that Europeans are now going beyond China and going beyond economic field. So going beyond China, meaning that more cooperation with like-minded partners, and so Japan, Australia, and others. And so Chancellor Scholz, on a visit to Japan, just very much in the middle of the war in Ukraine last month or 2 months ago, was a clear demonstration that the new German government is interested in working more closely with the like-minded partners in Asia. So that is very much a part of a going beyond China aspect. And also the going beyond economy, of course, means that the raising political and security profile of Europe in Asia. So that is very much a welcomed in Japan. And finally, let me say a few words on the geopolitical and changes and whether the geopolitical risks have increased, and because that's part of the questions that I got from our convener. So first the thing I wanted to emphasize is the implications and consequences of the increase of food price and oil and other fuel prices on Asia, because of course the hike in oil price and other things have influenced Japan or the European countries as well. But we are sort of still lucky to be able to afford a higher price oil and other things. But in some more less fortunate countries, the food price and oil price hikes are having more serious impacts. So I think it's very much in our responsibility. I mean, Europe and Japan and United States in the context of G7 and other things that we have responsibility to address this problem, because of course everything started with the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's for sure. So 100% responsibility on Russia, that's for sure. But still, we have been imposing sanctions on Russia, and that have had some impacts, the unintended consequences as well. So I think it's very much in our interest, not only our responsibility, but also it's in our interest as well to address such the repercussions of the things that have been taking place in the context of the war in Ukraine. And so just very finally, quickly on the impact on China, because the people have been wondering what sort of impact would the war in Ukraine have on China's behavior, particularly vis-a-vis Taiwan. So, but I see there are two sets of inconvenient realities for the Chinese, and one is the fact that Russian forces are struggling in Ukraine. the Chinese actually expected a quick win for the Russian forces, but the reality is far from that. So the Russia's experience in Ukraine has demonstrated how difficult it is to conquer your neighbor, particularly the neighbor where the people are hostile to you, hostile to the invader. So now the Beijing has to revise its contingency planning, military contingency planning vis-a-vis Taiwan. So perhaps it takes some time. But the problem is that in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I'm quite sure that Beijing will come up with a better military strategy. Better invasion planning for Taiwan. So we have to be very much worried about that. And another set of inconvenient realities for the Chinese is the very high level of unity among Europeans, Americans, and Japanese in imposing sanctions on Russia. So it's always a nightmare for Chinese to see Americans and Europeans cooperating together. So the current level of unity, particularly transatlantic unity, is something that the China didn't want to see. So again, that China, I'm quite sure that Beijing will come up with a better plan to make its economy more resilient against international sanctions and other actions by the West. So for the moment, it's good news for us, but in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I think the China will come up with a better plan. So there are still so many the issues we have, and so I'm very much look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was a tour de force in covering so many topics in just a few minutes. And I have, of course, many questions, which I will keep to myself for the next few minutes, as somebody who has a lot to say will now take the floor. My colleague, Professor Frédéric CHARILLON. Frédéric.
Thank you very much, Philippe, and thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador and dear colleague, Professor, for those two very challenging and interesting interventions of yours. I will just react to some of your points, adding a few comments, and maybe just trying to launch a debate with a bunch of questions, like maybe 3 questions, not more. First of all, Ambassador PENOT stressed, rightfully, of course, on the link between the situation in Asia-Pacific and what is happening right now in Ukraine. Of course, it is seen as a test for Asia, also because of what Professor TSURUOKA said about the lessons that can be drawn from the Ukrainian situation, especially by China. Everybody can guess that China and Beijing observes very closely what is happening now in Ukraine, be it the success or the absence of success of the Russian strategy, and also, of course, the reactions of the West. Namely, especially the US, but also the couple between the US and Europe and NATO in general. So, of course, there is a deep link between those two situations, which might be a danger too, precisely because it is a test. The protagonist might be ready to go pretty far. It's not just a local conflict. It is a local conflict, but what is at stake is probably more global, and it turns to be, at least in the eyes of many observers, also a test for the balance of power between democracies and authoritarianism. It is seen and perceived as such by many observers and powers and governments. Probably in the world. What is also striking to me is that it's not just only a competition between democracies and authoritarianism, it's also a kind of competition between the methods of the 20th century and the methods of the 21st century. It seems that Russia, Vladimir Putin, believed that it was possible today in 2022 to do more or less the same things as at the times when the Soviet Union crashed the Prague Spring in 1968 in former Czechoslovakia. So a big country can invade a small one and change the situation and take it all. Clearly, from on the democratic side, especially in Washington, the bet is totally different. It is what I would call the 21st century method. The bet is that you cannot do that anymore today. If a power, even a big power, even a nuclear power, tries to do something like that, invasion, for instance, the costs will be very high. Political, but also military costs will be very high. We must say that the United States has a first-hand experience about that after what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially Iraq. Afghanistan is different. But so we have this test too. Ambassador PENOT also recalled us that France does not support confrontation and doesn't want to support the logic of blocks, which is a very old French stance, a kind of Gaullist stance, refusing the logic of the blocks in international relations. I would have a question here. Don't you think, Ambassador, that we should clarify our position? It's pretty clear in a way that we don't want a return to the logic of blocks, but how to avoid being considered a reluctant ally again in this affair. We understand that the French will not to fuel the rhetoric of war, the rhetoric of blocks, especially in Asia-Pacific. But things have changed in a way. France has probably clarified most of its misunderstanding with the United States on the matter, especially in the recent years by coming back to the integrated command of NATO and so on and so on. So isn't there a risk? Don't you think there is a risk to come back to this image of a reluctant ally, and how to avoid it? Also, you rightly, very interestingly pointed the need to enhance the EU dimension in Asia Pacific. How do you measure the cohesion of the EU group towards that? How do you think that all the EU members, or a majority of them, or are ready to play a role in Asia Pacific, and what kind of role until where? Professor TSURUOKA insisted on first of all on the role, the position of Japan, especially regarding Ukraine. It was very striking to me how Japan showed solidarity with the democracies in the Ukrainian affair, which is of course a very noticeable point in the crisis. The EU and North America, two pillars of the West, once again with much caution about this expression, could find the clear support of Japan in the Ukrainian affair. Japan stands with the European and North American democracies. We didn't have any doubts about that, but the message is very important, especially for China, especially for Russia, and probably for many other countries in the world. It raises to me the question of the engagement of Japan in the new geopolitical situation. It is a debate always in Japan. I'm not a specialist of Japan, but I was very lucky to have a very interesting trip invited by your Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan in December 2019, just before everything closed with the COVID crisis. And we all know that there is a pretty harsh debate in Japan on the engagement of Japan in those affairs. How would you assess the support of the public opinion in Japan regarding this clear and very precious engagement of Japan in the Ukrainian affairs. It seems to me that we have a common point, the EU and Japan. We have difficulties for many years to have a statute of strategic power in relation to our economic weight. It's not something new, and we still have this problem, this difficulty in common. Also, it was very interesting to listen to you talking about the lessons drawn by China about what's happening in Ukraine. China, you say, was probably expecting a quicker and faster Russian success in Ukraine, which would be a lesson for Russia, for China, of course. But do you think that, well, in Europe at least, many observers in the public debate stress that maybe China will think twice now before trying to invade Taiwan or launch a kind of military aggression in Asia Pacific? Do you think it will be the same? Do you think it will look like the same as what is happening right now in Ukraine? Can we imagine that China would be ready to launch this kind of pretty old-style invasion like Russia did in Ukraine? Don't you think it could take a very different form? Maybe a kind of cyber destabilization or something more progressive, something more subtle than what Russia tried to do in Ukraine. And maybe very quickly, and to finish, just a few questions. We've noticed, and it was pretty striking to us in Europe, the very strong reluctance to criticize Russia in the South, among the countries in the South. It was the silence, or sometimes more than that, in Africa, in the Middle East, or well, the reluctance to criticize Russia was pretty clear. How is it in Asia? I'm not talking about Japan, but rather the southern countries like in ASEAN or other countries. How is the situation regarding Russia and Ukraine right now? And also maybe a question for Ambassador PENOT. What if our American ally establishes a link between the security situation in Asia and the security situation in Europe? Namely, what if the United States asks the European allies to be much more present with them, with the US in Asia Pacific, for instance, by maritime patrols in South China Sea, trying to enforce the liberty of navigation and so on? Well, what if the US asks us, Europeans, a deeper and a more assertive presence with them in Asia Pacific, clearly linking this European support to the American support in Europe? Because it's maybe a fear that we can have. Well, what do we do if the Americans tell us, okay, we are here for you in Europe, given the situation with Russia and so on. Now we ask you to be with us in Asia to contain China. What would be the European response to that? I will stop here because we must keep some time for the debate. But thank you very much for your very interesting, fascinating interventions, for your two interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Frédéric. I think on this last question you ask, if I may say, my impression has been until now that the Americans wanted the Europeans to have a sort of a show of support, but not much more than that, and would have preferred, certainly under the previous administration, but even somewhat the Biden administration as well, to maintain a stronger military in Europe, so that the US can withdraw and focus on the Indo-Pacific. But that's why we have the French ambassador to the Indo-Pacific, so he can give us his thought. Christophe, would you like to respond to Frédéric's many questions?
I'll take the last question first. I agree with you. I think the US policy is clearly to ask, and this has been going on since Donald Trump, to ask the Europeans to share a bigger part of the burden in Europe. They are committing enormous amount of resources to Asia. They are still very much prominent vis-à-vis China, maybe not for long, but at the moment they are on, in many areas, on technology, on advanced system, etc. So I think for the Americans, any EU contribution to the security of the Indo-Pacific is welcome, but I don't think they have in mind to ask us to share a very big part of the burden, because they want us to do that precisely in Europe, not in Asia. I'll take the second question then. I go in reverse order. What about all EU members? It is very true that all EU member states do not have the same degree of interest or the same level of presence or engagement in the Indo-Pacific. But what is important, what happened through the adoption of the strategy, is that there is a collective recognition that the EU as a group has strong interests in the region, and that countries who are not interested or who are less interested now because of Ukraine will not prevent others to engage, and more importantly will not prevent the EU collectively to engage in the region. So I think the fact that we have different interests, not different interests, but different level of presence, I would say, or level of commitment to the region is not an obstacle, because we have a common policy, which is the EU strategy that was adopted by all member states. And then the first question about the logic of blocks, how to avoid being considered as a reluctant ally. When I speak of the reluctance of the EU and France to follow the logic of blocks, it is not only because it is in our DNA, it is also because countries in the region do not follow this logic and do not want to be drawn into a polarization and have to choose between America and the US. If you look at ASEAN, if you look at India, and to a certain extent, if you look Japan and Korea as well, to a certain extent, this is what we hear. So it's not only a French vision or European vision, it is also what partners in the region feel like, and it is, I think, very important. We have a China policy. We still have this policy, which was adopted in 2019, of engaging China when we can as a partner, and that involves, on climate change, on biodiversity, on non-proliferation, North Korea, Iran, and other issues such as the burden of debt for African countries. But we also consider that China is a very serious competitor, economic and technological, and a systemic rival. So there is a balance between the three, and more. Well, we consider that in the past 2 years, the balance has gone very much in the direction of systemic rivalry, but we still want to engage with China. We still have a dialogue with China, including on human rights issues. And it doesn't mean that we are, or that we seek equidistance between China and the US. France is an ally of the United States. We work very closely with the US in many parts of the Indo-Pacific, for instance, in the Pacific part of the Indo-Pacific, but also on other issues. There are many issues on which we are converging with the US. So it's not an equidistance. It's simply the fact that we are allied, but we are not aligned.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I want to pick up on what Frédéric actually asked when he mentioned the idea of reluctant ally. Professor TSURUOKA, how do you feel the role of the EU, perhaps the role of France as a kind of third power trying to play a role in a region which is far away, which is not necessarily our back garden, so to speak, when you have President Biden visiting Japan recently and the Republic of Korea, and when you have the Shangri-La Dialogue, which many of us took part in recently, and things seems very much focused on the Pacific region, while of course France considers itself rightly as a Indo-Pacific nation, and I'm sure Ambassador PENOT can add on that. But I'd like to hear your view on this, how you see from your standpoint this move, and also as a footnote, you mentioned Russia, a very interesting point earlier. Could you tell us in a few sentences how you feel about Russia-Japan relations, especially since you have territorial issues? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for all the fascinating, important questions. And first on the role of Europe in relation to that of the United States in the region. I don't think Europe can substitute role played by the United States, and I don't think the Europeans want to substitute America's role in the region. So the United States and Europe, individually as individual countries, or the EU or NATO, they have different roles. And but from Japan's perspective, and from my personal perspective, what I think is increasingly important is the sort of a network of various US alliances and partnerships in the region. So it's quite interesting that the US Indo-Pacific strategy talks about the bringing together and making a bridge between European allies and partners and Asian allies and partners. So how we could bring those different alliances and different partnerships together and closer. And that is quite important, because in the Japanese context, for example, what we have been trying to do in recent years is to connect the US-Japan alliance with Japan-Australia strategic partnership and Japan-France and Japan-UK defense relationships, and how we could ensure synergies between those different kinds of alliances and partnerships. So that is becoming more important because of the relative decline of American power in the region. So it used to be that American presence was the dominant. So the power balance between the US and China was very much in favor of the United States, but that is no longer the case today. So we need to bring other partners and allies together, first and foremost to support the current rules-based order in the region, and also it is about maintaining the US presence in the region as well. So and that is why, and because of the relative decline of American power, and that is what the President Biden and others in the United States are fully aware of. So that is why the US is asking more help from its allies and partners. And so that is why it's in America's interest as well to see more European, for example, the naval deployments in the region. So the bringing together, or perhaps plugging in the France or the UK and other European partners into what Japan, US, or Australia are already doing in the region. So that I think is becoming more important. And the and if you add on I think the Beijing's approach to Taiwan in the wake of the war in Ukraine, yes, the Frédéric is really correct that it now makes more sense for Beijing to try to be more subtle rather than doing an overt classical type of military invasion against Taiwan. So because now the Beijing is fully aware how difficult it is to invade an unfriendly a country or neighbor. So the more subtler approach, utilizing the disinformation or hybrid tactics, including cyber attacks. I think that's what the Beijing is now thinking of, rather than firing missiles against Taiwan, or rather than landing the ground troops on Taiwan. So and related to that, I'm personally actually getting a bit concerned about the way in which NATO helps Ukraine and NATO helps Eastern flank countries like the Baltic states, because what we are seeing now is a weapons support without troops and without participation, without direct involvement. Yes, they have good reasons not to directly involved in the conflict in Ukraine. Of course, you don't want to fight against Russians in Ukraine. That's 100% understandable. But a bit of the sort of a worrisome discussions starting to take place in the United States and in Asia, and particularly in the United States. Now, the more and more people talking about sending weapons to Taiwan if something really serious happens there, rather than talking about the sending troops. So yes, the sending weapons is good, but sending weapons in some cases cannot substitute direct involvement, direct military involvement. So there are now more and more things, and we have been discovering how new things we can do just by sending weapons or sharing intelligence with Ukrainians. But if the effectiveness of armed support, weapon support becomes too high, then that could end up the decreasing incentive or need for direct participation, direct military involvement. So if the success of weapon support end up increasing, end up the heightening threshold for direct military involvement, that I think could cause some concerns, not only in Taiwan, but also in other US allies in the region. And another debate that I'm following closely and getting a bit more concerned about is the German way of reinforcing its NATO presence in Lithuania. So Chancellor Scholz seemed to have agreed about expanding the presence of German forces in Lithuania from a battalion level to a brigade level. So, but in the end, it's now becoming clear that what the Germans are suggesting is not a sending combat brigade to Lithuania, but only establishing a headquarters in Lithuania, and the troops remain in Germany, and they will be sent to Lithuania only when necessary. So this is a sort of a forward deployment without troops. So this sort of model gets established in NATO, so the meaning of forward deployment could change. And that is not a quite good news for countries in the on the front line, like the Baltic states, of course, but at the same time, Taiwan, Japan, or other and the US allies and partners in the Asia-Pacific region. So the weapon support without troops, or the forward deployment without troops, if these sort of a new innovative sort of a concepts get established, then that's may not be a great news for those sitting on the front line. So that is my sort of a personal
Thank
concern.
you. Thank you. Very, very interesting. I think you have to take into account, which member state of NATO. Obviously, the German approach. I'm sure Frédéric can comment on that. He's quite different from the French approach or from the British approach. There's, many books will be written about this subject, but let's move back to the Indo-Pacific, if I may. And there's one question from actually one of my students, which I'm glad to see, Udita. It's about investments, and perhaps Ambassador PENOT could answer that one. Investments can be seen as a modern way of spreading a country sphere of influence. So with initiatives such as Global Gateway or the Build Back Better World in the US, how do you rationalize the principles of sovereignty, independence, non-interference, and confrontations that are deeply rooted and publicized as the value of the EU and Western powers as a whole? Very, very ambitious question, but Christophe, would you like to take that one and maybe comment on anything else that Professor TSURUOKA said?
Well, I don't really share this view that investment is wrong in a way, because investment is obviously a way to spread one's influence, but there's nothing wrong with that. As long as the recipient country accepts it and that it is being the investment is being carried out by respecting the rules. And this is precisely why we want to provide an alternative offer to Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road Initiative sometimes means investment that do not respect sustainability, debt, social regulations, environmental impact, and so on. As long as investment is based on these rules, personally, I see nothing wrong with it. And I think the EU is already the first investor in the Indo-Pacific, #1 investor, and will remain so for the foreseeable future. But my second comment is that investment is not enough. We have invested a lot in China. We were hoping that developing our economic ties with China would bring about in the future a different China, a more converging China, converging with our values, and it hasn't worked. It's obvious. So investment is one aspect of the policy, but you need to also act and engage in other issues, including security, including promoting principles of multilateralism and the rule of law, including digital economy, connectivity, including climate change. So investment is not in itself the answer to what is going on in the Indo-Pacific, but it is something that we should pursue. And I don't see anything wrong with it, personally. And Professor TSURUOKA said something very interesting regarding the complementarity, I think, that exists between different contributions to the Indo-Pacific. I think the the US are a key actor in this region. It's obvious for everybody. Europe has not the same level of presence or engagement, but European action can be, which is converging, but sometimes slightly different from what the US want to do, is complementary to the US approach. And I think what Professor TSURUOKA was describing is actually a multipolar Indo-Pacific, and this is precisely the vision that we have. And of course, we have to promote this vision because a bipolar Indo-Pacific would be a nightmare for all countries of the region.
Right, and this is also a view from China. Actually, China is very much in favor of a multipolar world. I'd like to hear briefly, Frédéric, to comment on Professor TSURUOKA's points on NATO, which is of course a little bit outside Indo-Pacific, but if you could give us a quick answer, that would be great.
Well, sorry, there is a noise outside. On the difference between France and Germany, more precisely, or
yeah. Well, or you know, or how he's wary from Japan, and this is actually, you know, a Japan-Europe dialogue that we're having right now, you know, and how you would respond to this concern that, you know, and you're an expert on defense issues, so how, you know, this new word of supplying weapons and equipments rather than troops or that rather than political support.
I think it's what we can witness now in Ukraine, which is to supply, to send weapons rather than troops, is a very specific situation. Ukraine is not in NATO. This is precisely the point. And it's not part of the priority allies of NATO. And that's why the United States explained several times. So we will, the American approach, I mean, this American approach, we can, let's not try to imagine what would have been the American response to the Ukrainian crisis with Donald Trump. That would have been, this is another problem concerning NATO's reliability today. But let's stick to the Biden administration. The American administration says precisely Ukraine is not part of NATO. Ukraine is not a priority ally. So the case is different. Of course, if one of our allies was attacked, be it a NATO member, or in which case Article 5 would be triggered, or even a country with defense agreements, which is the case of Japan. It has even been extended a little bit by Joe Biden to Taiwan when he repeated twice that the US would defend Taiwan. The first time we didn't know exactly if it was a gaffe or a kind of improvised answer. The second time, clearly, that's exactly what he was meaning. It's different. So I think there are fears among the allies of NATO and the US today. And there are fears because several times in the past, the United States seemed not to be a reliable partner, but each time with countries or groups who had no defense agreements with the US. The Kurds, Syria in a way, now Ukraine, and these triggered fears among the allies of the US. What is the US still reliable? Is there still a guarantee of security? What if we were attacked? What would they do? And so on. And each time the United States answer that's different for you because we have agreements and we have defense agreements. So I would not worry too much about a general trend for NATO trying to replace the sending of troops by sending weapons. I think Ukraine is a specific case that does not illustrate a global trend as far as the real alliance with treaties and text are concerned. I'm not worried too much about that. But another problem is when you mentioned also the difference between the allies. It's not a matter of will. I think it's a matter of capacity. I think that Germany, for instance, but even most of the NATO countries are just today not able, I think, to fight and to show some determination in a situation of tension. I think this is a problem. We all depend on the United States in NATO right now. I don't think the doctrine has changed. I think that the loneliness of the United States as a strategic actor able to act concretely, to send troops or with a kind of military savoir-faire or know-how to support allies, especially with a projection of troops at the other side of the world and so on. The US is probably alone in this situation. France and Britain a little bit, but with very limited means today for budgetary constraints and many reasons. So I think that's a big problem. Then, of course, there is another problem, which is what if Donald Trump or a kind of someone like him comes back to power in, I say, this is the real problem. And today the question is, should countries like European, in the EU, or countries like Japan develop a capacity to defend themselves alone? Of course, there is a question there, but I don't think the doctrine has changed. I think the solitude of the United States in its capacity to act is the problem today. And then maybe tomorrow, with a new administration, maybe the will of the United States to act.
Right. Thanks very much. That was very helpful. We have only about 12 minutes left. I'd like to go to the chat. We have a few questions, and I'll go to TSURUOKA Sensei in 1 second. But the first question is about the South China Sea. We were talking about crisis in the Indo-Pacific, and do you see that as a potential crisis beyond the Taiwan Strait, which is the one we've been discussing mainly? And the second question is from that was from Erta Manenti, and the second question is from our colleague Professor Joseph Maila. Is asking, since the launching of Quad by Prime Minister Abe, there's the idea of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. What about the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific? Is there a robust consensus on this vision by all partners and stakeholders? Erta is saying that's not her question, but we'll go back to your question in a minute. But it's just about the recognition of the South China Sea, I understand. But Professor TSURUOKA, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, the situation in the South China Sea, it's quite unstable and unpredictable, and things have been taking place all the time, actually. So the problem is that the Chinese are fully aware that no one is prepared to confront Chinese behavior, Chinese actions in the South China Sea, because no one is prepared to fight against Chinese in the South China Sea. So and Beijing is fully aware of that. So it's almost like a situation in Ukraine, because the importance of Ukraine for Russia is much higher than the importance of Ukraine for other powers in Europe or the United States. And the Russians are fully aware of that. And in the Chinese case as well, in the South China Sea, the China is fully aware that no one is prepared to fight against Chinese in the South China Sea. So that is why the what we call salami tactics, the Chinese have been doing various things under the threshold of other powers, sort of the sort of a boiling point below the threshold of taking action by other countries. So that's the situation. So it's really a frustrating situation, to be quite honest. So that we know what is taking place, but we know at the same time that we are not prepared to take physical action against the Chinese action in the South China Sea. That's the situation, and that's been there for some time, for some years now. And the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, that was quite an achievement, because the I think as Ambassador PENOT mentioned in his initial remarks, that the very notion, the Indo-Pacific, has been very much contested by those who are skeptical about this concept, like Chinese and Russians. So and finally, the ASEAN came up with a notion of Indo-Pacific. So finally, that ASEAN is now on board with those who champion the idea of Indo-Pacific. So I think for ASEAN still, what is quite important for ASEAN countries is not to take sides between China and Japan and China and the United States. So still that's sort of the taking distance from big powers. It's still there. So that's not going to change. And this is also quite related to the fact that the big part of Asia remains silent on the war in Ukraine. So only a handful of countries in Asia are imposing sanctions against Russia. So Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, and interestingly, Singapore. But that's it. There are so many countries in the region, but only 6 countries are imposing sanctions on Russia. So and Japan, actually, the Kishida government has been trying to get more countries on board. So Kishida himself visited various countries in Southeast Asia, but we haven't been quite successful. So Indonesia is a big focus in Japan's effort, because Indonesia is holding the G20 presidency this year, and President Joko of Indonesia has been quite open that he has invited Mr. Putin to G20 summit meeting later this year in Indonesia. So
and the president of Ukraine.
Oh yeah, yes, that's quite true. But still, inviting Putin is quite something. So but vis-a-vis Vietnam, actually, the Kishida, I think, made some success, because to what extent it was because of Kishida, that's what we don't know. But after the Kishida's visit to Vietnam for the first time decided to give humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. So it was just a small step, but the reminding the Asian, the neighbors about the seriousness of the war in Ukraine and Russian behavior. I think this efforts, I think it's going to continue. And I think Japan is in a better position than the United States or many European countries in terms of reaching out to Asian countries, because one of the things that I don't think really effective is the presentation of the problem, or presentation of the way in which we describe the war in Ukraine as a democracy versus authoritarianism. I don't think it's really a productive way in terms of reaching out beyond Europe and North America, because there are so many non-democracies in Asia, and you don't really have to be a democracy to criticize Russian behavior, because Russian behavior is a blatant violation of international law. So even if Ukraine is not a democracy, this war is unacceptable. Even if Russia were a democracy, this is not acceptable. So whether you're a democracy or not, that doesn't matter fundamentally. So in terms of getting more countries on board with us, I think I don't think it's really a great idea to emphasize too much about the democracy versus authoritarianism aspect of this war.
All right,
thank you.
I got it. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. I think our time is running out, but I'd love to hear Ambassador PENOT's comments on all the things that he's heard, and also on Southeast Asia, which he knows very well, and you know, if he wants to comment on the fact Indonesia is inviting Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky as well, but you know, as a sort of conclusion, please feel free to comment on all these many questions. Many of them were fascinating. Please.
Thank you, Philippe. No, I just wanted to add one or two comments to what Professor CHARILLON has just said regarding the ASEAN outlook. And I agree completely with what he said, but just to add that it is a fairly short and general document if you read it, and if you compare it to other documents, other strategies. But it reflects a consensus because ASEAN is a consensus-based organization. And when we assess ASEAN as it is, I think we should remember that it is a very different animal from what we have in the EU. And number two, that they have managed to claim their centrality by becoming the only security organization network in the region. You know, it's irreplaceable. The fact that the ASEAN Plus format, the ASEAN Forum, the Regional Forum, the Eastern Asia Summit, East Asia Summit, have become venues where China and Japan can discuss together. Russia is also part of these, Australia, India, and it's a great achievement. The other achievement regarding this time the Indo-Pacific is that ASEAN have managed to have China endorse, that was at their last ASEAN-China summit, the concept of Indo-Pacific for the first time. I think it's the first time ever that China has subscribed to a text, a communique of the summit, which contained the word Indo-Pacific. So that shows somehow the strength of ASEAN, I would say. And more generally, I wanted to thank you and to thank all participants for this very insightful exchange. And I was very pleased to be able to discuss Indo-Pacific issues with you, and I look forward to doing it again. Thank you.
Well, and thank you to you, Ambassador. We were very honored to have you, and always happy to hear your thoughts. And I think, you know, many people would agree that a few years ago, I don't think the Indo-Pacific would have been such a core subject in international relations between you know, in such a dialogue between the Japanese and European experts or diplomats. So this is basically where you know the world is moving. Save alone what's happening, of course, here in Europe with a very dramatic war, as we all know. But I hope we'll have more of these dialogues, and I must thank again Professor Michito Tsuruoka, Associate Professor at Keio University in Tokyo, for giving us all these insightful comments and ideas. Very, very well informed, and Ambassador Christophe, Ambassador of France for the Indo-Pacific, Professor Frédéric CHARILLON of ESSEC Business School. This event will be posted on ESSEC IRENE's website, so feel free to circulate, and you will hear again from IRENE about our next Sirene events. And thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
See you. Bye.
Bye.